Jump to everybody, get your. Jump to, get your. Try it again. Get jump to, get your. There you go. Okay, so, thank you. So I was asked to talk about what Chassidus changed or added, right? That was the official topic. So I don't know what we do and what we do and what we don't know. So I'm just going to, this is what I like to do when it comes to these things, is assume you don't know anything. That's okay. And if you already know what I'm telling you, then it's a review, and it's a good thing anyway, because it's often the case when you know something. But by bringing you review and you kind of remind yourself, and helps you reconnect to the things you already know. So I'm going to, just to give you a layout of how I'm going to do this, I'm going to start with a question that the Rebbe asks in a very famous Yutes Kislev Sicha. It's an edited Sicha in Likutei Sichos. And the Rebbe answers the question, but before I get to the Rebbe's answer, I'm going to give you a little bit of background, the historical context of where Chassidus comes from, where the Alter Rebbe comes from, and then it'll help you really properly understand the answer, and then hopefully that'll help us understand what Chassidus, what the breakthrough of Chassidus here is. Okay, so you all know the story, right? The Maggid of Mezrich, I think was your Pinchas, I want to say Karitzer, I think, who saw a manuscript of Chassidus from the Maggid that was rolling in some inappropriate place. We know the story? No? And he said something to the effect of, look how terrible this is. At the time he was still Misnagid, anti-Chassidus. This is during the times of the Maggid, his Rebbe. And well, what is this? The secrets of Torah, descriptions of Hashem himself is rolling in the mud. How could this possibly be? You see, Chassidus is a terrible thing. It's being, Hashem is being rolling in the mud. And this started a whole tumult. And the Alter Rebbe came along and said, in justifying the Maggid, gave the following mashal, which you may be aware of. Right? There was a prince who was very sick. And the king, of course, hired many doctors to try to save his one and only son. No success. Until finally one doctor comes and says that there's a remedy that I'm not 100% sure if it works, but it might work. And what we have to do is, you got to take the king's crown jewel. As the story goes, this crown jewel is the jewel upon which the entire kingdom, the whole kingdom is symbolized in this jewel. Got to take it, grind it up, mix it with water, pour it into the kid's mouth. Hopefully some will go in, because the kid can barely swallow. And if he swallows, maybe he'll be saved. So of course the king, without hesitation, says, for sure, do it. No one ever heard this before? You have? Yeah? And so the Alter Rebbe said the same thing is true of Chassidus. It's Hashem's crown jewel. It's the secrets of Torah. It describes Hashem himself. So we're going to grind it up, so to speak, bring it down to the people. And even if some of it ends up on the floor, so be it. We have to revive a nation, a generation of people that are in spiritual sickness, and if a little bit goes in, they'll survive, and it's worth it. And with this, he defended the Maggid, and I could be missing details of the story, but I think the Maggid later said, that during this conversation in Shemayim, in Bezdin Shalmaila, in heaven, they were listening to the conversation, and there was a kitrug, there was a decree against the Maggid for teaching Chassidus, because their Pinchas raised a good point. There was manuscripts rolling in the mud, and when the Alter Rebbe defended the Maggid, this settled the matter in the heavenly court. Yeah, you heard this before? Okay. The second story that the Rebbe brings in this Sicha comes from Beis Rebbe. Have you heard of the book Beis Rebbe? I don't know if it exists in English. It's in Hebrew or Yiddish. Anyway, it's the most primary source for the biography on the Alter Rebbe, Mitzvah Rebbe, and Tzemach Tzedek, written actually by a Chabad Chassid, but not a Lubavitcher Chassid. He was a Chassid of the Tzemach Tzedek's second to oldest son, the Menashe's older brother, the Mahariel of Kapust. Anyway, so in there he writes the famous story when the Alter Rebbe was in jail. The Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid came to visit him. Right, you know the story, and they came to visit him from Gan Eden. And the Alter Rebbe, who recognized the Maggid, didn't recognize the Baal Shem Tov, but he figured it was the Baal Shem Tov because the Maggid let him go in first. And the Alter Rebbe asked of them, why am I in jail? And they said, because you're teaching Chassidus. So he asked, should I stop? And they said, no, when you're done, when you get out of jail, you're going to teach even more Chassidus. So the Rebbe asked the simple question. The Maggid, the problem arose in heaven for the Maggid for teaching Chassidus, and the Alter Rebbe defended it. Right? And in heaven they accepted his defense. And they said it's a good defense. There's a generation of people who are at risk, and it's worth it to teach Chassidus to help, to hopefully maybe save God's prince, the Jewish people. And here now the same accusation comes to the Alter Rebbe. This is a famous sikha that asks this famous question. Yeah, heard the question before? Yeah, we're familiar? Familiar with the answer? No? Maybe? Okay, so now I'll give you a little historical context to give it to the answer. The Rebbe basically says that we must say that there's a difference in the way the Maggid is teaching Chassidus and the way the Alter Rebbe is teaching Chassidus, and therefore the accusation against the Maggid is not the same as the accusation against the Alter Rebbe, and therefore the defense cannot be the same, because the nature in which they're teaching Chassidus is very different. So it goes something like this. When the Baal Shem Tov came along and started teaching Chassidus, right? At the time, at least in that part of the world, Jews were in a very bad shape. Not just spiritually, but on an economic, on a very physical, social level. There is the famous pogroms of Tach v'Tat. A couple years earlier, Tach v'Tat are names of years, Tav Ches and Tav Tes. I don't know what they are in English. And it's a little bit before the Baal Shem Tov. My apologies, I'm terrible at dates. Google it, you'll find out. And there's actually, in the beginning of Sivan, there were some communities, maybe even still today, where Jews fasted, certainly say slichas, to commemorate the atrocities that happened to Jews during this time. There was 2 years of mass pogroms. Tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of Jews were murdered throughout Ukraine and Russia by the Cossacks, and it was a terrible, terrible time. Along with that, right, in general, the Ashkenazim suffered from this whole business of being harassed by their friendly Christian neighbors. Not as much as the Sephardim. Today it's a little different. We have problems from our Sephardi cousins, not from our... I mean, like, the Muslims nowadays give problems, not the Christians. But historically, the Muslims are much better to the Jews in Sephardi land than the Christians were to the Ashkenazim, right? Sorry? Yeah, like if you can meet a Sephardi family that will tell you, my family lived in X town in Morocco, in some village somewhere for 10 generations. No Ashkenazi can tell you about any town in Europe. They can't, because by the time 1.5 generations happened, they were harassed by somebody and kicked out of the town, and then this part's kicked them out of there, and this part's kicked them out of there. They were murdered there, murdered there. The Jews in Europe didn't have a very easy time, at least during this period. So that's the first problem the Jews are facing during times of the Maggid, during times of the Baal Shem Tov, prior to the Baal Shem Tov. Just physical desolation, poverty, and that kind of thing. Along with that, you have a spiritual problem. Right, the Christian, I'll give you an example. We say in Aleinu, Shehem mishtachvim lev v'larik, right? Which means we bow down, we say that we bow down to you, Hashem, and they bow down to, rik doesn't mean spit, it means emptiness, to void, to nothingness. You know, we're talking about people who serve idol worship. They bow down to nothing. Many Ashkenazi Sidurim, that line is taken out. Why? Because they were afraid of their Christian neighbors and coming and saying, look, you think we're void and nothing. You think our belief is nothing. You're making fun of us. And that would cause a pogrom. So they took it out. You know, as far as the Gemara is concerned, the halacha is we should have birchas kohanim every day. Duchening. That we have only on Yom Tov, we should do it every day. And Sephardim do? Why don't Ashkenazim do it? Good question. The Ramah writes, the Ramah who's like the codifier of Ashkenazi halacha, writes, because of all the harassment they're getting from our neighbors, Jews are not joyous, and duchening is associated with joy. So we're scratching that whole minhag. Or halacha, I should say. In fact, the Alter Rebbe said, a number of things he said that, Ili Yashecheli, if I were able to, I would reinstitute daily birchas kohanim. The Alter Rebbe said that. Anyway, the point I'm making here is that along with this physical harassment comes a spiritual desolation also. Right? Jews are in a very tough time. And in this climate, You have a fellow, you may have heard of him, called Shabtai Tzvi. You heard of this guy? Yeah? He was a self-proclaimed Messiah who used Kabbalistic ideas and started talking Kabbalah and convincing himself and gaining a whole popularity and became a whole big personality, and people did think he was the Messiah, and many people followed him into leaving Judaism completely. By the time his successor took him over, Yaakov Frank, something like that. Google it, I don't remember exactly. And he completely went like way off in terms of religious Judaism. So in this climate, what happens is you have a huge class separation, right? You have the elite Jews, and then you have the masses of impoverished poor Jews who can barely scrape together a loaf of bread, and nor can they string together a sentence in Hebrew. They just can't read out. They don't know Aleph. They don't recognize the letters they're looking at in the Siddur, if they even own a Siddur. Not because it's not like today where they were necessarily secular, per se. They were just completely ignorant. They didn't know anything. And in this kind of environment, there evolves this community of elite, self-proclaimed scholars who isolate themselves in this thick ivory tower, and they're busy self-congratulating each other about how smart and how amazing they are and how stupid everybody else is and how nobody else knows anything about God, and we know everything because we have Torah. And this becomes more and more and more insular, and these enclaves of self-proclaimed tzaddikim and self-proclaimed scholars and self-proclaimed bearers of the torch of Torah become more and more isolated and separated from the masses. And in this climate, the Baal Shem Tov comes along and says, you guys in the ivory tower forgot the basics of Yiddishkeit. You're busy learning Torah all day long, and in the Torah you learn, it says, love your fellow Jew. It doesn't qualify what kind of Jew you have to love and not love. And you're forgetting there's a bunch of Jews next door that you're not loving. They're not new things the Baal Shem Tov told them. They're just things that were so forgotten because of their own their self-congratulation, their selfishness, their inwardness. They forgot about, to a certain extent, they forgot about the Eibishter. They were so busy with their own religiosity. Ironically, they're busy. This is not news, by the way. The Gemara says in Yuma, the Gemara says that someone learns Torah Zacha if he, Chassidus quotes this about 1,000 times, that's how I know it. The Gemara says that if someone learns Torah Zacha, if he merits Nasalei Samachayim, it becomes a potion of life. If Loi Zacha, if someone learns Torah and doesn't merit, Nasalei Samamavis, Torah becomes a potion of death. That's what the Gemara says. It means the Torah itself could become the impetus for the person's ego and completely forgetting about the Eibishter, who gave him the Torah. Right? There's the Chassidus explains this about the Churban Abayis. The Gemara gives a bunch of reasons for why the Beis Midrash was destroyed, and one of them is Al Shaloi Baruchu B'Torah Tchila, because they learned Torah, but they forgot to make the bracha of Torah before they learned Torah. Right? In brachas in the morning, you say Berachas HaTorah every day, right? So they forgot to say that bracha. So Chassidus explains, doesn't mean literally they forgot to say the bracha. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. But the point here is, the bracha is acknowledging the one who gave you the Torah. So they're learning Torah, but they forgot who gave the Torah. They forgot about the Eibishter. And along came the Baal Shem Tov and reminded them, guys, you're very busy up there, and you're very, very smart. You know a lot of Torah, it's fantastic, but you're forgetting about the Eibishter. You forget about the Eibishter's people. Right? Another Gemara, the Baal Shem Tov keeps on quoting and reminding them. The Gemara says that Rabbi Yehuda, I think it was Rabbi Yehuda, he was praying for rain. It was a drought and he was praying for rain. And rain didn't fall. And he bemoaned the fact that he couldn't successfully get rain and said, in a previous generation, they only learnt one Masechta, one tractate, and they davened to Hashem and Hashem gave them rain. And I know and we over here in our yeshiva, we learn the entire, all Masechtas, and Hashem doesn't answer our tefillos for rain. Must be, says Rabbi Yehuda, and this is a quote the Baal Shem Tov would say often, Rachmana liba bai, Hashem desires the heart. So maybe I'm smarter than the other person, maybe I know more Torah, but I'm lacking the sincerity that other person who knew less than me has. And the Baal Shem Tov came along with this message and said to the simple Yidden, you don't have Torah, you're not educated, you can't read Hebrew, fine, but you have a pure heart. This is what Hashem wants. This connects directly to Hashem. If Torah is about a relationship to Hashem, then We can't blame someone who wasn't born for not having for not being born into a smart family or a rich family for not having a relationship with Hashem. You mean it sincerely, then you have a connection to Hashem, right? If I asked you off the top of your head, what's the most famous Baal Shem Tov story? You would say what? Most famous Baal Shem Tov story. Right, which one? I'm going to say it to you, and you're going to say, of course. Sorry? Kukuriku. Yeah? Everybody knows the Kukuriku story, right? There was the Baal Shem Tov couldn't daven. He didn't want to daven because in heaven there was Yom Kippur. In heaven there was some decree against some town, and Baal Shem Tov was battling to try to get rid of that decree before he started davening on Yom Kippur. I think it was in the Ilah, maybe it's Kol Nidre, I don't remember. And all the Talmidim, Marsi, the Baal Shem Tov is in this moment. They're trying to work with him, and one kid calls her out, screams out Kukuriku, because he's a farmer, and all he knows how to do is to imitate the animals. And the best animal he knew how to imitate was the chicken. So he hollered out the sound of a chicken. Imagine what kind of ignorant kid who cannot even say he can't even say Shema Yisrael. The only thing he knows that he's in Yeshua on Yom Kippur, because he's a Yid. But think of how ignorant this kid has to be, that all he knows is how to make the sound of a chicken. And this is the Baal Shem Tov's Jew. The simple Jew, because he has a pure heart connected to Hashem. Now you understand why there's such controversy, why the Baal Shem Tov is such a controversial figure at the time, why there's so much opposition. Think about it. Baal Shem Tov comes along and starts using the Torah that these guys supposedly hold to literally, he wasn't just like another tzaddik, another Talmud Chacham who started his own path in Torah. Just completely shattering and breaking their entire establishment. He was rocking the foundations of the whole Torah establishment. So there's massive opposition. Especially thinking, this guy's quoting Kabbalah, this looks like another Tzaptai Tzvi. So there was massive opposition to what the Baal Shem Tov was doing. Even though inherently there's nothing revolutionary. Everything I'm telling you, quoting from classical sources, right? There's the story, I can't remember all the details, again. But the Frierdiker Rebbe was traveling and he met some other Gedolei Yisrael, other Jewish personalities and figures, and they asked him, what does Chassidus do? So he was sitting in a hotel lobby in some fancy hotel, and he pointed up to the roof and said, "You see that piece of art there on the roof? Beautiful sculpture." And they looked up and said, "Oh, I hadn't noticed it before." He said, "That's Chassidus. You never noticed it before. Now I pointed out to you, you see, oh, that's the way it is. Okay, now I see it." So this doesn't make up its own things. It all comes from the classic sources. But when you point it out, now the whole thing, like a light bulb turns on. Now when this guy walks into that hotel lobby, it's a much more beautiful lobby because he noticed the art. Not because it wasn't there before, not because he didn't walk into the lobby before. He just never paid attention to it. Right? So that's what the Baal Shem Tov did. Reminded people to pay attention to basic things that they know in Yiddishkeit. But it ended up rocking the foundations of the whole established Torah system of the time. So that's the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov, of course, is succeeded by his Talmud, the Maggid of Mezrich. Right? Now the Maggid of Mezrich, to a degree, his success in a way was the fact that he not just had a big following, but actually had a following of Talmidei Chachamim. The Baal Shem Tov also did. The Baal Shem Tov traveled a lot, but the Baal Shem Tov also had, the Maggid himself was a major Talmud Chacham who followed the Baal Shem Tov, right? So clearly the Baal Shem Tov had Talmidei Chachamim. But the Maggid had the famous Chavraya Kadisha, right? The holy community of which the Alter Rebbe was the youngest member. You may have heard all these stories before. And he's very successful in getting these Torah leaders to join Chassidus. And at one point, the Maggid sent out the first batch of Shluchim. Sent out his Chavraya Kadisha to go to different places around Europe to teach Chassidus. And that's how the Alter Rebbe ends up in Belarus, in White Russia, and other people ended up elsewhere. And all the different Hasidic sects you find today, Bel's Vision, Satmar, whatever you want, take your pick, will trace their lineage back to one of those Talmidim in some town somewhere who was sent by the Maggid. Right? That's when Chassidus became from one movement to a bunch of movements. When the Maggid sent out his own, they were tzaddikim in their own right. You're talking about the Yitzchak Berditchev, you're talking about the Melech Melazensk, you're talking about big tzaddikim who were sent throughout Europe to teach and spread Chassidus. Now, At this point, there is another problem we encounter in terms of preserving this new idea, this new way of learning, of connecting to Hashem with sincerity, with real emotion. And the problem is, I haven't seen this problem written anywhere, but it's kind of like the unasked question that the Alter Rebbe comes to answer. Is, what the Baal Shem Tov is teaching is fantastic for the simple Jew. What about the guy who's not simple? What should he do? If someone's foolish, someone will come and tell you, oh, you know what the Baal Shem Tov wants? The Baal Shem Tov wants that every Jew before Ne'ilah should scream kukuriku. Obviously, it's not the case. The whole point of the story is that the person meant it for real. If I scream kukuriku, I'm just crazy. I don't mean it for real. So how do you get to that point of meaning it for real? You're not simple like that Jew. You've already studied. You know things. You're more complex. Now expecting you to have the same simplicity that guy had? It's not going to work. So what do you do now? This is integral to the preservation of Chassidus. If this idea is going to survive, if this method of learning this method of connecting to Hashem is going to survive, that has passion, that has song, that has tefillah, that includes prayer and all this passion the Baal Shem Tov is reminding people that exists in Torah, how do you preserve that? You have to somehow transfer that to people that are not simple, that are educated. Or we're going to keep all Jews uneducated so that they don't know how to read a siddur and they can all scream kukuriku? That's obviously not what Hashem wants, and that's not what Chassidus wants. So what do you do now? Right? It's the problem with questions. Once you ask a question, you can get an answer, and either the answer is a good one or not a good one, but you can't unask a question. Once the question's been presented, the question's there. So once you encounter the question, what's the nature of Hashem, you can't go back to thinking like a 3-year-old that Hashem is, right? It says that when a 3-year-old says Baruch Atah Hashem, it's the purest bracha. Because what does the kid think? Hashem is Hashem. It's not complicated. Hashem is everywhere. Hashem is existence. Everything that exists is Hashem. It's all great. It's fantastic. Once you get a little older, you start saying, what do you mean Hashem's existence? There's this, there's me, I feel, I want. Right? We can't make you go back to the 3-year-old Baruch Atah Hashem anymore. So what do we do now? How do we move past that? And this is integral, as you can imagine, to the preservation of Chassidus. And this is where the Alter Rebbe split from the other pathways of Chassidus. The other pathways of Chassidus, their solution was as follows. Okay. To get every person in the world to start feeling for Hashem in this pure fashion, forget about it. Not sustainable. We can have one person who knows how to do that. We'll call him a Rebbe. And everybody else in the community is going to hang around this guy, and they'll feed off of his connection to Hashem. He means it with the whole heart. He means it sincerely. And everybody else sings along with him, watches him davens with him, learns from him, listens to him. That feeling, that relationship he has to Hashem will rub off on them. Sounds familiar? Yeah. That's why they were referred to as Chagas. Chagas stands for Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferes, which are the 3 main emotional properties, right? You know about Chesed, Gevurah, and Tiferes? Yeah? So, why is it called Chagas? Because what they're expecting from Chassidus is an emotional, from their Chassidim is an emotional reaction. You come to a tish, you come to a Friday night tish, and there's bleachers, and there's hundreds of Chassidim, and they're singing beautiful melodies. It's very moving. And there's a Rebbe standing in the middle, and the Rebbe taka means it, assuming he does taka mean it, and he loves Hashem, and he sings with his whole heart, and you know, it's infectious. And everybody else rubs off on that, and it lasts until next Friday night when the tish happens again. Right? That was their solution. And that's their solution till today. And the Alter Rebbe had a new solution, different solution. And this is where he started this idea called Chabad, which stands for Chachma Bina Das, which as opposed to the emotional system, it's not the emotional system, the intellectual system. This is not to say, this is a mistake people make in thinking that, oh, Chabad is Chabad, so we're all about being smart. Forget the emotions. That's not the point. The point of Chabad is for emotions, but sustainable emotions. How are emotions sustainable? Emotions are sustainable when someone uses their Chachma Bina Das. So the Alter Rebbe's answer to the problem is, here's how we're going to make this feeling, this purity, this kukuriku last. We're going to make people spend hours and hours studying about what Hashem is, understanding what Hashem is, learning how their neshama operates, learning methods and how to deal with that nefesh elokis, nefesh bahamis problem, understanding who Hashem is, and fighting day by day until hopefully one day at Ne'ilah they're going to feel like screaming kukuriku. Maybe not literal kukuriku, but something else. Chabad is not about ignoring the emotions. It's about getting real emotions. As opposed to Chagas, which is, that guy's happy, so I'm happy. It's not really me. I'm just bouncing off somebody else's feelings. Chabad comes and says, the Alter Rebbe comes and says, you got to create your own feelings. Literally, create your own feelings. It's actually one of the unnoticed revolutions of the way Tanya teaches you about emotions. What the pasuk says is a mitzvah: love Hashem, love God your Lord. Alter Rebbe asked the question: how do you command someone to love? Either I do love or I don't love. What is this commandment? Love. You tell someone to keep Shabbos, don't drive a car. It's a commandment. It's very simple. Don't get into the car and drive. Tell someone to love. How do you tell someone to love? Either they do or they don't. Says that's the Alter Rebbe. The commandment is to do things that's going to generate the love. Think about Hashem in whatever way it connects to you, till the point that you actually get that love, get that feeling. And this is one of those, just mentioning one of the revolutions of unnoticed revolutions of Tanya, is the validation of contrived emotions. You know what the word contrived means? It means to make them, not from outer circumstances. We think of emotions as a reaction to something else. Right? You listen to a beautiful song and it brings some sort of kind of emotion. Right? You hear a story and it brings an emotional reaction. That's a reaction to something else. Says the Alter Rebbe, you want to know what real emotions are? You create them. Not reaction to somewhere else. Chabad, think about it up here and create your own feelings. This is the Alter Rebbe's solution to the problem. It's a revolutionary idea. Even within Chassidus being revolutionary, this is even more revolutionary. So all the people who were mad at the Baal Shem Tov, so to speak, for telling simple folk that they're special and they're amazing, they double down on the Alter Rebbe. Now you're saying not just simple folk are special, simple folk are supposed to understand God now? What are you, out of your mind? They double down on their accusations. So whatever the Alter Rebbe said to defend the Magid doesn't work for himself. It's a whole new beast. It's a whole new game. We're not just looking to inspire people with little quotations and tell them something exciting and tell them, Hashem loves your pure heart, so now you go scream kukuriku. The Alter Rebbe's not doing that anymore. The Alter Rebbe is making a whole system in which you are going to develop your own relationship with the Eibishter. It's wild. It's a wild idea. And this is a whole new beast and a whole new accusation, and that's why the Alter Rebbe sat in jail. For this idea. I'll conclude with, and this the Rebbe actually does say in the Sikha, and the Rebbe compares this to like the Rambam. Actually, it's something else, but so two things. The Rambam wrote a book called Mer Nevuchim. You heard of Mer Nevuchim? The Guide to the Perplexed. So, not like people think, the perplexed is not someone who doesn't know anything. In fact, if you look at the Rambam's Hakdama, if you look at his introduction to his book Mer Nevuchim, he writes that the book is written for one person, because he found one person in the world who knows all of Greek philosophy, knows all of Torah, and now he's perplexed, so I'm going to help him straighten it all out. That's the perplexed individual he's talking to is. Someone who knows Greek philosophy and Torah. So Rambam writes in his introduction, well, someone might come along and read this book and say, the Rambam is a heretic, he's a kafir. And it's a risk I'm taking, but I'm willing to take it because of people like you. For the people who are going to be learning Greek philosophy, and that was the case after Rambam's death, there was the Spanish Golden Era, and Greek philosophy was very popular, even amongst Jews. And the Mer Nevuchim served as a way for people to deal with that. The Rebbe brings that parallel. And one final thought the Rebbe concludes with, the Rebbe makes this point very strongly, and that is as follows. Whereas the focus of the Maggid was to revive the dying prince, and there all you need is just a drop of that potion to go in, just a drop of Chassidus to get the guy a little excited. The Alter Rebbe was even much more daunting task. and more daunting than everything I've said till now, but not disconnected from everything I said till now. And that is, the Alter Rebbe decided he's going to prepare the world for Mashiach's coming. Mashiach's coming is a time when each person sees Hashem, when each person has a relationship with Hashem himself. That's what Mashiach is. That's the definition of Mashiach. Both in the Rambam and certainly in Chassidus. The definition of Mashiach is a time when the Eibishter is as obvious as the Stender. And therefore you can obviously have a relationship with Hashem. And the Alter Rebbe decided he's going to make a preparation to make that happen. He's going to make it available for each person to develop their own personal relationship with Hashem and know Hashem. Now for that, the mashal that he gave to defend the Magid, that wasn't good enough. And Yutzes Kislev really is the fact that the Alter Rebbe was in jail and then came out of jail is a sign that it's the stamp from heaven that says this is the right thing to do. That now is the right time for each Jew to develop their own personal relationship with Hashem, not just feeding off somebody else. I wanted to mention this earlier, but in the Tanya he makes a distinction between different kinds of truth. Different kinds of truth. Right? So he says that there's emes la'mitoi, there's a truth, objective truth is just the truth. But then there is emes la'mitas shaloi. Talks about the Beinoni as different levels. It's his truth. So if a person connects to Hashem at a certain level, maybe he hasn't got to the very essence of Hashem, or it hasn't got to the depth of his heart, maybe. But in that space, it's true. The feeling he's feeling now is a true feeling because it's the result of something you thought about, something you understood, something you connected to. And that's the essence of why David went to jail, what he did when he came out of jail, why he wrote Tanya, why we have Chassidus, why we're celebrating Chassidus. And ultimately that's the truth that's going to bring us closer to Mashiach's coming, where each person will really have that relationship with Hashem in a clear and obvious fashion. May it happen now. Amen.